And now, marine weather around Alaska. Your marine weather begins with the sea ice, and the ice continues to gradually melt off and retreat northward here across the Arctic Ocean. The Beaufort Sea here along the Arctic coastline. Areas of open water is beginning to become more prevalent, especially through the lower Chukchi Sea and then down through the Bering Strait. And again, this trend will just continue as we go deeper through the summer season. Now, looking at the southeast panhandle for Monday's marine weather, winds will be southerly, Stevens Passage up through Lynn Canal at 10 knots, waves a couple of feet. Northwest winds, Ketchikan, Metlakatla down across Dixon Entrance with waves a few feet there. Look for westerly winds south of Sitka at 10 knots, offshore of Craig, 4 to 5 foot waves, but the winds turn more southeast to easterly and pick up 20 to as high as 30 knots west of Yakutat with waves 5 to as high as 10 feet once you get there south of Cape Suckling. And then on Tuesday, winds will be variable in the inner channel, Stevens Passage, waves a couple of feet. South winds 10 knots, Lynn Canal, but northwest winds continue there down through Dixon Entrance and waves generally just a couple of feet in through the inner channels. For the outer coast within 15 nautical miles of shore, we expect winds to be northwest to west, 15 knots south of Gustavus and south of Yakutat. A little more southwesterly once you get west of Yakutat Bay, and waves generally running 4 or 5 feet. Across the northwestern Gulf, we had some gale force winds earlier today across the entrance there of Cook Inlet. Those winds will come down to 20 to 25 knots from the southeast, waves 6 to 8 feet. We'll have 25 knot winds across Prince William Sound with 6 foot waves. And then as you go from Kayak Island toward Hinchinbrook Passage there, we expect east-southeast winds of 30 knots with waves 8 feet. And on Tuesday, look for those winds to come down to a variable around 10 knots here in the north central Gulf. Southeasterly 10 knots in Prince William Sound with waves of a couple of feet. Same thing in upper Cook Inlet. And then the entrance of Cook Inlet will still see some southeast winds around 25 knots with waves 6-7 feet. Now, as a frontal system in low pressure area has worked its way gradually northeastward up through the upper Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, look for east to southeast winds around 20 knots, including Bristol Bay. Falling off, though, to variable winds, only around 10 knots as we get down through the lower half of the peninsula. Waves running from 5 to as high as 8 feet off of Kodiak Island, and then within Bristol Bay down toward north of Cold Bay, waves generally just running a couple of feet. Winds will pick up again on Tuesday as yet another frontal system gradually lifts northeastward across the peninsula. East to southerly winds, Kodiak Island at 20 knots, but those winds will increase 25 to 30 knots along this and ahead of this frontal system. Waves building back up 8 to 9 feet on the North Pacific side and 3 to 4 feet on the Bering side. Across the Aleutians, the far eastern Aleutians, southerly winds 25 to 30 knots. Once we get back further west, low center will be just south of Kiska. And we expect winds could be as high as 35 knots between Adak and Kiska out of the east. And then for Tuesday, winds across the eastern Aleutians, 20 to 25 knots, falling off to 15 knots around Nikolsky. And we still have some 30-knot winds northeast to northwesterly on the north side of Adak, which could lead to waves as high as 8 to 12 feet. Across the southwestern coastline, we have easterly winds within Bristol Bay to 20 knots, southeast winds 15 knots, Kuskokwim Bay, and then a little stronger maybe through the Atollin Strait, but otherwise offshore, southeast to east winds out of the lower Yukon Delta and Norton Sound at 15 knots and waves running a few feet. For Tuesday, winds continue more or less an easterly, southeasterly off the land flow, offshore flow, though picking up to 30 knots here in Bristol Bay from the southeast, easterly 30 knots within Kuskokwim Bay, waves 4 to 6 feet there. South winds in Norton Sound 15 knots with 3 foot waves, southeast winds coming in off of the Yukon Delta, and then northeasterly winds rather 25 knots with 8 foot waves around St. Paul. Across the Arctic, Coastline, 20-knot easterly winds, Kaktovik through Utqiagvik. And then as we drop down along the northwest coast, Point Lay to Cape Lisbon's northeast winds 15 to 20 knots, where there is some open water, waves 3 to 4 feet down into the lower Chukchi Sea, and those winds will turn more southerly across the lower Chukchi Sea and then southeasterly, passing down through the Bering Strait. And on Tuesday, overall across much of the region, we're generally expecting south to southwest winds, generally around 15 knots or so, though still of an easterly component up toward Kaktovik. Ice fairly in place offshore of Utqiagvik and Prudhoe Bay, but where you do have some openings there and some open water, we expect waves 3, maybe as high as 4 feet, continuing through the strait and down to the north side of St. Lawrence Island. And again, you can find us here on our new YouTube channel at NWS Alaska, so please share it with friends and family and get the word out that we have moved. And we hope you like the fact now you can see your weather segments broken up into different sections. You can have the general Alaska weather or view the aviation or the marine weather. So be sure to join us again. Thank you.